Well, the issue of adaptation, it's very broad, it's very complex, and over the last even 10 or 20 years, one of the things that's been undercovered in that discussion is population and social dimensions of adaptation. So a lot of people consider it in environmental terms and in infrastructural terms, but not in terms of the nature of people's lives, what it means to have climate impacts coming to where you live, and what are the resources and characteristics that you have to help you have resilience in the face of that change. So what we work on is really understanding that, using data particularly to understand that. We're here to support an interagency, an inter-UN initiative around the use of particularly spatial data, geographic information systems for adaptation. And one of the things that UNFPA is working on is the use of census data for adaptation. So 90% of the world's population was enumerated in the 2010 round of censuses, and not just counted, but also the characteristics of the population. So their education, their occupation sometimes, their migration patterns, their housing, their access to services. This is vital information for adaptation efforts. And not only is it available, but it's available at a very fine scale. So what that means is we can put it on maps, we can match those maps with the geography of climate hazards, whether it's low elevation coastal zone, dry lands, drought prone areas, flood prone areas, and we can put those together and have a very good understanding, not just of how many people live in these exposed areas, but the kinds of characteristics that they have that either make them more vulnerable or potentially can be addressed through adaptation programming and make them less vulnerable, more resilient.
I mean, how is that information made available? I mean, is it relevant information, say, gathered in Latin America, relevant to other parts of the world, to Africa perhaps? I mean, are there comparisons made between data gathered in one place and the other? I just wonder how the information is, having been gathered, is then applied effectively.
That's an excellent question. So the census is undertaken by national statistical offices within countries, and the data are shared in a variety of ways. And what we're saying is that it's critical to take those data, report them in different ways, and to merge them with data that are often gathered remotely. So through satellite imagery, through climate projections, through downscaled climate projections. And what the spatial platform allows, what geographic information systems allows, is the ability to bring all of those data together in a way that's accessible, that's understandable. It's on maps, so that's a medium that's fundamentally understandable to a lot of people, policymakers, planners, but also community members, so that they can look and see what the nature of their environment is around them, how it's expected to change, and what are the characteristics within the community, and how those all link together to produce really, in essence, what we hope to be a plan to adapt to the changes that are coming.
Right. Okay, and is there still scope for improvement? So you talk about 90%, and presumably it's the more remote areas that you've not been able to get to, that we can't get people out there gathering that kind of information. I mean, is it a process which is improving constantly?
Well, the 2010 round of census is by far the largest data collection process ever undertaken in the globe. It's a massive improvement on prior years, for instance, in the ability to put people on maps, which really wasn't necessarily possible in many censuses. The census is also the only comprehensive data collection effort like it of its kind. Surveys don't have anywhere near the coverage. So there already has been massive improvement, but there's no question that there are gaps in coverage, particularly among, of course, the most vulnerable. And that's just not necessarily people in far-off remote places, but it's people in urban areas who might not be formal residents, might live in slums, might live in hard-to-reach places, or might, for whatever reason, not want to be counted by the state. And so that's an important aspect of why we want to link also with community organizations that are doing local enumerations of slums, Slum Dwellers International, for instance. And this Geographic Information Systems platform allows you to have the flexibility to bring in information that's locally produced, locally collected, that is much more detailed and targeting hard to reach populations, and integrated into this kind of common system so that you can have a sense of those people's vulnerability as well. And that's critical because they may be the most vulnerable.
Right. And you're here in Doha, presumably to let people know, to let organizations know that you have this information, the information is available.
Well, tomorrow we have an event on this initiative, Integrated Spatial Data for Climate Adaptation Planning. It's a side event with a number of different UN and international organizations. But what we also want to say is that this is not our data and it's not our work. Ultimately, this is the work, the data, the responsibility of national statistical offices, of ministries of environment, of ministries of planning and finance, to bring, and of local authorities, urban authorities in particular. You know, a lot of cities now have a responsibility to do adaptation planning, but there's not necessarily the resources or the knowledge or the frameworks to know how to do that. And what we're saying is you have the information. It's available in your country. It's often available in fine detail for your locality. A lot of people don't necessarily know this, but it's there. And so, you know, one of the things, what the UN wants to do, of course, is not to do it for countries, but to help build the capacity of local planners, of local researchers, and of local community members to really use this information to build their own resilience.